All right. Well, I'm going to say welcome everyone to what was supposed to be a special conversation with Marcus Ruiz Evans from CalExit. I'm going to give this just a few more minutes, but apparently I've been stood up. So I'll use this as a bit of an AMA. If you guys want to ask me anything, if you guys have any questions for me about what's going on here. Dan, this is unforgivable. Well, we'll see how things go. As I said, I'm going to give Marcus just another minute or two in case he does manage to get in and sign on here. Send him some emails, send him some text messages, left some voicemails with him. Tried to reach him on social media. I'm not sure how else to reach people nowadays, but so the conversation we were supposed to have was about a secessionist movement called CalExit. It's Marcus's coming from a left-leaning perspective. I don't think I'm mischaracterizing Marcus in saying that. And he was supposed to come on to present the left-leaning case for California seceding from the United States, which I thought would have been a great conversation to have. So in the meantime, I'll let everybody know what's going on here with this channel because we do have some news. And that news is that, first things first, this lovely studio that you see behind me will be no more in relatively short order. The check has cleared. The contracts have been signed. I'll be moving into my bigger and better office over the next coming weeks. So looking forward to that. If you guys want to keep up with me, because this channel isn't just moving its physical location, I'm in the process of backing up everything and converting to Odyssey. ODYSEE.com, which is backed up by library. I'll put information in, I'll keep you guys posted as I get more updates in that regard. But that seems to be a friend of mine actually owns it's a decentralized video hosting website, if you will. And when I say decentralized, it means it's supported by blockchain, which means that there's no way to get yeeted for all intents and purposes from Odyssey. And the person who runs the company is actually a good friend of mine who I've known for, we basically went to college together. He was on, we played Get This Ultimate Frisbee together. He was on the opposing team in most cases. And I won't say where he went to school because I don't want to get him in trouble. But we've known each other, we've been very close friends for a very long time. This guy is a free speech absolutist, and he will not yeet you for political grounds, and he will stand his ground. So if you guys are looking for a truly free speech platform for video for video hosting, Odyssey is the place to go. It's backed by by a library that's lbry.tv. So I believe I have in my description where you can follow me on library. Let me just make sure that I have that there. Just checking here because I've got a lot of screens. Yeah, so I've got my library channel in the description of this video, so you guys can check that out. Dan, I see you're checked in here. So if you have a way of contacting or reaching out to our buddy Marcus, if you could help me out with that, that would be wonderful. Not sure what to do about that moving forward. I have been way more active on MeWe, so if you guys want to find, from what I can tell, to be a free speech replacement for Facebook, because it doesn't really provide a replacement for how Twitter operates. That was Parler. You guys can follow me on MeWe. Again, the link to follow me on MeWe is in this video's description. Because, and again, I'm doing all of this because we need to prepare for the inevitable day when we get yeeted from YouTube. And I do actually have a shirt designed for getting yeeted on YouTube. I'll probably have to order one for myself here eventually, because we will that's almost a given at this point that we're going to get yeeted from YouTube. So I guess there's a few things that we could talk about in the meantime. So everyone seems to know that I actually want to start some memes here. So you'll have to forgive me. Let me see if I can how quickly I can pull this in. Image scene. Let's see. Let's do. So the theme of Joe Biden's speech, of course, was unity. So I'm going to bring up the memes. Why not? When the left says that they want unity, what they mean. Here, let me get this. Dagnabbit. Damn you, OBS. Why do you have to be so difficult sometimes? So when the left says they want unity, they mean unity. This is Unity from the show Rick and Morty. Hopefully I won't get DMCA'd for showing a screenshot here. So in case you guys don't know, this is becoming one of my favorite shows. I know, I'm a millennial, an effing millennial. And this character, so the main character is Rick from Rick and Morty. He's the guy in the lab coat, right? So in case you guys don't follow Rick and Morty, I'll have to give you the really, really difficult, boring lecture here. From Rick and... So the lady, the voluptuous young lady that is on Rick's shoulders, is a collective. So the word unity in Rick and Morty refers to a collective mind. And that collective mind gets puked from one individual to the next. And I mean literally puked. As in, the other characters in the background are basically being mind controlled by this collective, I don't know, being entity, and they all act in unison. And so when the left means unity, they mean this. They mean complete and total centralized collective control of the totality of your thoughts and actions. So in this case, these people are unified. They are united under this collective heading. So yes, if you guys go ahead and screenshot this if you feel like it. I'm sure if you guys follow me on MeWe, you will have seen this before. I want to get this meme started. When the left says unity, this is what they mean. They mean capital U, unity from Rick and Morty. I'd love to have a check-in here with Marcus. So by the way, for those who are just tuning in, it looks like I got stood up. So we're going to use this basically as an opportunity to do a little bit of an AMA. I'm not going to abandon this completely. I'll probably wind up deleting this live stream because the title, the description, the thumbnail, they no longer apply here. I got stood up, and that's just all there is to it. I guess I suppose I could check my phone to make sure that I don't have any new text messages. No new text messages. And let's see, I guess I could check my email, see if we have any updates from the emails. Nope, no new updates from the emails. So the other thing I want to get started here. So I guess this would be a good time, if we're going to do it, to have the conversation about the long game. Because my take on secession is that there are so the Democrats control the House. They control the Senate. They control the presidency. They also control the media. They also control the internet. They also control the technocracy in Silicon Valley. They also control academia. They also control public education, which is a government-protected monopoly on education from K through 12. What that means is they basically have a rule by ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer. They have single-party rule, and they have allowed the radicals within their wing to completely take over the party. And I wouldn't normally say this because I live in a town that is a pink town, and the Democrats that are in my town are basic bitch Democrats is how I'll describe them. Moderate, mainstream, just want to see more taxes Democrats. And I realize it is blasphemy to say that that's not that big a deal. However, these are Democrats who are wholly against communism, that exist completely antithetical to the AOC wing of the DNC, and who are, for the most part, frustrated with the DNC, and not frustrated in the way that Vosh is. Vosh is frustrated with the DNC because the DNC won't just go full-on nuclear with communism. As in, just screw it, we've got everything, so we're going to declare emergency powers for President Biden. President Biden is going to mysteriously fall down a set of stairs so we can get our ideologue, Kamala Harris, to actually control the seat, and all of a sudden we have a state where we have one-party rule, and we're going to dismiss and arrest folks like Ted Cruz for carrying out the actual democratic process, even if I, Mike Sinello, actually disagree with Ted Cruz's decision to vote the way he did, and with his vote in the way he did when it comes to the Senate. However, that is a democratic process. Of course it is. Of course it is. And if Chuck Schumer decided to not vote to certify the electors, had Donald Trump won and had Chuck Schumer been the Senate Majority Leader, or had Chuck Schumer not been the Senate Majority Leader, I would have also disagreed with Chuck Schumer there. So when we have all of these institutions, when we have Hollywood, we have the mainstream media, when we have complete control of thought and of the exchange of thoughts by a single party and by a single identity, and where that single unit, that single, as we mentioned, that single collective in unison, in unity, if you will, when that single collective is one that stands completely antithetical to even the most basic understandings of liberty and our system of governments here in the United States, and systems of checks and balances, and of the basic concepts of free speech, when they're calling for even more cram downs than what has already existed, when they're openly calling for the collusive anti-competitive behavior from Silicon Valley, when they're calling for a technocracy, when they're saying things like Nancy Pelosi isn't even close to far enough to the left, when they're deliberately looking to radicalize, that's kind of a scary thing. And we kind of have three options. One, we can continue to play the short game. Two, we can begin playing the long game. Three, we can quit playing the game altogether and form our alternative banks, form our alternative currency, and form our alternative government, which is what I was hoping this conversation to be about. Alternative government. In this case, secession. Now, my take on secession has been that right now there does not exist a legal pathway for unilateral secession. What does that mean? Well, if Kristi Noem up in South Dakota just starts drafting secession papers and submits them to the floor and says, bye-bye, that would be actually an act of war, because there is no... How do you adjudicate something like that when you have to appeal to a higher authority than the U.S. government? Well, there is no higher authority than the U.S. government, in which case the only place where those debates, those arguments can be settled is on the battlefield. So I have always said, and this is a debate I had with Elliot. Elliot, if you're in the chat, thanks for coming in. I'd love to bring, you know what, folks in the chat, if you guys know Elliot Axelman, reach out to Elliot and let's bring Elliot on so we can just basically have a complete, we had a debate previously on secession. He was pro-secession. I was con. I'm kind of turning on my position. So if you guys want to reach out to Elliot for me, because Marcus has stood me up, I know Elliot won't. If Elliot's available, he'll jump in. Dan, if you're in, just text Elliot and I'll send him, I'll email him the Zoom link so he can join me. So my take, it has always been fairly pragmatic in that regard. It's not to say that there shouldn't be a legal framework towards unilateral secession. Unfortunately, right now, the legal pathway to secession is call a convention of states, in my mind. Call a convention of states, create the legal pathway, and then after the convention of states, you go about that legal pathway. My understanding of my thoughts are that we should be calling a convention of states. We should very immediately get that pathway pushed forward. And then Kristi Noem can go ahead and decide to leave if she wants. And then I don't know why they would agree to do it at this point, but if California wants to leave, I'm not going to go so far as to say good riddance, because if I'm going to say good riddance, then that's not really a principled take. That's kind of a partisan take, although also good riddance. If California wants to leave, they can go ahead and leave. Bye-bye, right? I'm not going to say don't let the door hit you on the ass. I'm not going to say you won't be missed. But I'm going to say, hey, listen, the right thing for DC to do is just to shed a blind eye on all of this. All right, let's see. It looks like Dan's chirping in. Dan, I'll get to you in just a minute. So my thoughts on secession has always been pragmatic. My opposition to secession when I was talking with Elliot was pragmatic. Is it worth risking DC viewing your secession as a state? Marcus says he's in Zoom. All right, well then we'll bring in Marcus here momentarily. But so my take has always been pragmatic. And at this point, the question of is it worth the potential cost of having DC decide, you know what, civil war declared. No, you're not allowed to secede. This is an act of war. And for me, the answer has always been no. And at this point, I don't know. I might be convinced. So Marcus has actually joined us. So Marcus, if you're listening on Zoom, just give me 1 minute. Folks, let me get our title screen up while I get Marcus put on. Hey, everybody who's watching, thanks for sticking it out with me. We will be back momentarily. And I think that's kind of a good segue to bring in the left-leaning perspective and a left-leaning take, which I don't think is a mischaracterization. And we will see you shortly. All right, we are back. So with me today is guest Marcus Ruiz Evans from CalExit. I had an introduction on paper for everybody, but given the context of the conversation today and what's happened so far, I don't think I can actually use that. So Marcus is going to present to us. Marcus and I are going to have a conversation on secession, and Marcus is going to be presenting the case for California secession from the United States from a left-leaning perspective. As I said before, we're going to have Q&A at the end, so if you guys have questions for Marcus or me during this conversation, which we had initially framed as a debate, and as you can see from the lead up into this, there isn't really enough for us to disagree on to really have a meaningful debate. So that's why we've kind of framed this as a conversation. So everybody, please welcome in Marcus. Marcus, let me get you unmuted. Marcus, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for being here.
Yeah, it sounds like you're going to have to actually speak up, Marcus, for Zoom to pick up your
Michael,
audio.
thank you for letting me be here, and I really
Awesome.
appreciate to be able to speak on behalf of Yes California CalExit. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. So, Marcus, just want to give as I do with all my guests, let everybody know how they can follow you and the movements that you're leading.
Well, you would need to look at yescalifornia.org. That's yescalifornia.org, yescalifornia.org. You could also type in on Google or Bing, Yes California CalExit, and you would find our Facebook, Twitter, Instagram pages on social media. We have 40,000 people on Facebook, around 20,000 on Twitter, and we have an email list of around 160,000, actually 120,000 people. So a combined media outreach of 160,000 Californians across social media and email. Again, yescalifornia.org online, or Yes California CalExit campaign on Facebook and Twitter.
Oh, interesting. On Twitter, I see, Marcus, did you get the boot from Twitter?
I've been booted from almost every single media platform out there.
Well,
Personally.
we already, you know what? You may be in the wrong party, Marcus, but we already like you.
I get that a lot from conservatives. They're like,
welcome
really?
to the club.
Yeah.
Welcome to the club.
Thank you.
So let everybody else in YeetTube land, who's been yeeted off of every other quote unquote platform, let everybody know your case here for secession. Let's hear what your movement is all about.
Yes, California is the largest of all the CalExit organizations. We got very big 2017 with the election of Donald Trump, but we actually go back to February 2014 with Barack Obama as president. And we were talking about then that California loses money being part of America. So we are based upon international trade, whereas America is not. What that means is that we routinely have trade deals held up for 10 years by the federal government. Arnold Schwarzenegger criticized Barack Obama and W. Bush, a Republican and a Democrat, for stalling California trade deals, which would have brought in billions of dollars of cash. Because we were ready to have international trade, but then the federal government goes, hold on, let us spend 5 to 10 years looking this over, and then we'll give you permission before you can ever sell a product to anybody. And so I asked business owners, you're trying to start a store. Someone walks into your store and says, hey, I want to buy a Slurpee. And then some other person walks in and goes, wait, I'll decide if you get to sell that Slurpee for 10 years. Is that how you run a business? Nobody thinks so. Abraham Lowenthal, a professor out of Long Beach University and the University of Southern California, one of the most preeminent scholars on global international trade and expert here in California, said that California loses billions of dollars in international trade by being part of America. That was before Trump. When you add in the fact that we're a donor state and for about 40 years now pay more in federal taxes than we actually get back, and that money goes to fund roads, schools, dams, seaports, airports, levees, every type of infrastructure in America, better than we have here in California. So California has the worst schools and the worst roads. And then we pay money for 35 states to have better than us. So they're already doing better than us, and we spend our money so that they can continue to do better than us. That's gone on for decades. Even with Californians in Washington and Nancy Pelosi, they never stopped that, ever. So we've lost about $400 to $500 billion over the last 3 decades doing this. And we lose billions of dollars holding up trade deals. And we lose billions of dollars because America had a horrible global image before Trump ever came around. You're really not going to hear a lot about this, but the fact is that cell phones and smartphones and Silicon Valley internet products were going down in sales when Barack Obama was president, because the rest of the world felt that America did not protect rights and would spy on their citizens. So they didn't want to buy technology products out of California. Silicon Valley is one of our biggest industries. We lost billions in dollars of sales because of the horrible image of America created by Barack Obama. My God, it's only 20 to 30 times worse now. So take our money, get in the way of our deals, can't sell products because America has a horrible image unrelated to what we do here in California. Secondly, the people that we give that money to hate our guts. I mean, they hate us.
Really?
The Republican Party, yeah.
The Republican Party, yes, they do hate California.
Yeah. I would ask you to look at the surveys by Fox News going back in 2013, 2015, where they asked all their viewers, what state would you like to get kicked out? And a majority of all Fox viewers said California alone.
I mean, from Fox viewers, that doesn't surprise me.
Okay, well, sure. Republicans also have their entire convention last year on Don't Be Like California. So we have an entire political party aiming the gun at California. We also have the largest conservative media organization running surveys saying we hate Californians. And I would just ask you, go visit the South, go visit the Midwest. I have family there, been there. Yeah, they hate us. So I always ask people, you're spending money to support people who hate your guts while you have the worst of everything. And then when you want to help yourself out, someone gets in your way and says, no, you don't get to do that. And then when you're trying to sell products, and even if you get permission, the customer goes, oh my God, you're with him? That was all during Obama. All during Obama. It only got worse under Trump. That's the left case for CalExit in a nutshell, sir.
So, all right. So now that you guys have, I mean, the state is controlled by Democrats. Do I have that wrong? Like, as far as I know, the legislature is controlled by Democrats. Gavin Newsom's a Democrat. As far as I know, all of your major city councils are Democrat controlled. All of your city mayors, for the cities that actually have a mayoral system, are Democrat controlled. And now that the House, Senate, and presidency and 1600 Pennsylvania Ave are controlled by Democrats, why not fix all of your grievances through the existing system rather than simply forming your own country?
Thank you. So I would remind you of a president called William Jefferson Clinton. He too was a Democrat, and Californians loved him, and Californians were liberal, and they thought he was great. That didn't stop the federal government from taking our money in donor state payments. And then when there was a .com recession and we asked for a tiny bailout, maybe about 5% of the total amount that we...
when you said we, you mean the state of California?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
The state of California asked President Clinton for a bailout to help with the recession, which was started here, the .com boom burst. And Clinton said, no, you get nothing. That was after we had already paid hundreds of billions of dollars into the system. So I guess being a Democrat didn't get us nothing. Let's fast forward to 2010. There was a Democratic president called Obama. And we had another recession. And California said, hey, we put $300 billion into the system. Can we get $10 billion in a bailout for 1 year? You get nothing at all. Thanks, Obama. And Californians loved him. Let's finally fast forward to now. This is my favorite story. Nancy Pelosi's from California. And I see all sorts of talk about, oh, Kamala's from California, and you got all these Californians in the government, and they're going to run things just perfect. Okay, well, Nancy's from California, and she was the third highest ranking person in the government. We could have got stimulus checks in November, December. Ro Khanna called her out on that. Leslie Stahl called her out on that. CNN called her out on that.
God knows Fox News called her out.
Yeah, Fox too, but I'm just saying there were left people who called out Nancy, people who hate Trump called out Nancy and said, you told us I can't sign off on the deal in November, December because I have to wait for more money and I have to get support for California State. You got neither one of those and then signed a deal in January that got no extra money and no help to the state. So what exactly were you holding out for 2 months? Californians got jack. I know people who went homeless in December because Nancy couldn't come through with the money. So yeah, she's a Californian, and we got screwed. So what exactly do we get? You get Clinton can't get a bailout. Obama can't get a bailout. Pelosi can't get a bailout. So I know they talk about their big values, but when it comes down to we put 500 billion into the system, can we get a fraction of what you owe us when we really need it? No, you get nothing. That's 3 times in a row. Maybe we should pay attention, brother.
Yeah, so it seems like what you're calling for is devolution of authority, so that the states get to decide significantly more how it is they want to govern themselves. And this sounds to me more of just like vote libertarian. Do you have a response to that? Because the libertarian perspective on taking all of this is, yeah, if California wants to become, an echo chamber of the left, they can go ahead and do that. And here in, let's say, Wyoming or New Hampshire, or I'm in Connecticut, if California wants to do whatever it's going to do, if it wants to go as far left as they want to go, the federal government should be organized in such a manner that we here in Connecticut shouldn't care.
Yeah, David French and Richard Kreitner. David French is a conservative. He's well known. Kreitner is a liberal. He's well known. They both have books out right now on secession, where they literally just said what you said, Mr. Sinello. Hey, why don't you return back to some version of hardcore federalism? And if you don't, so that's a conservative and a liberal, both respected scholars saying the same thing. Let's return to some sort of devolution, et cetera. Originally, when I wrote the book, California's Next Century, that started this entire movement, I didn't even suggest full-blown leaving. I suggested Scottish-style devolution. I was very influenced by the work by Mr. Keating. He's a professor out of Scotland. And I found that what Scotland did was very workable. They basically were going for, we'll keep the currency and the military intact, but other than that, England, you stay out of our business. I got to tell you, that would work wonderfully here in California.
That almost sounds like what F.H. Buckley was talking about with the Canadian secessionist movement. Do we agree on that?
Yeah, basically. And I would also point out that Kreitner, Buckley, and French, I believe every single one of them said most likely to secede was
California.
Just saying.
So with the events of the last 3 months, do you actually see California as the most likely to secede now that you have a lot of Californians who voted at a federal level the way that the federal government is actually made up? So Californians voted almost exclusively Democrat in the major population centers, and you now have Democrats in controlling basically every major branch of our federal government. So do you think that California is the most likely chip to fall here in this case?
I do, for this reason. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Now, I don't agree with everything that she said, but she said something that was right on. America's the only country in the modern world where Biden and her are in the same party. No other modern nation that would ever happen.
In fairness,
and
that's
most
true.
of the planet looks at that and goes, "You crazy." It's only in America you have this really bizarre thing where they're both in the same party. It ain't natural and it's not sustainable. And I think we can see that because no one else on earth does it. So let's fast forward to the election, or take a step back to the primary for 2020. Now, I understand Joe Biden won. And on the surface, you see California Democrats and American Democrats. Looks like it's the same. Well, let's take a look at the primary. In fact, when we look at the California primary, Joe Biden only had around 25% of the vote. Bernie Sanders had 35. If you buy into the philosophy that I'm told that Elizabeth Warren was introduced to split the progressive vote, and that if you had a choice between simply Joe Biden and a progressive, Bernie would have had 50% of the Democrat vote here for the primary in California to Biden's 25. Even with that, Bernie beat Biden by 10 points. So our Democrats ain't like your Democrats, basically, and the primary proved that.
Is that a good thing though? Like, are you implying? And I don't know. I'm asking this question not as a gotcha, but because I honestly don't know the answer. Are you implying that the California Democrat is much less of the Joe Biden Democrat and much more of the AOC Democrat?
Correct, 100%.
Is that a good thing?
It's just reality. I'm not going to pass judgment on that. It's one of those things. I'm a little bit more conservative than the average Californian, but I will not lie. And I love California and I love the values we have here, and I'm willing to take a little bit of the things that I don't like. It's a fact. This is Bernie country. This is not Biden territory. Biden didn't even campaign here, didn't even show up to the Democratic primary here. You know why Biden didn't even show up to the Democratic primary and he was the only Democrat not to do that? Because we're full of these people called Mexicans and they don't like him because they know what he did with Obama. So he ain't liked around these parts, couldn't even show his face because he was scared he was going to get so embarrassed that he'd lose the nomination. And then he lost it in California by 10 points. That rock landslide that Biden was supposed to beat Trump on, which never happened. Oh, the repudiation of Donald Trump and a landslide for Biden never happened. But I tell you what, here in California, there was a landslide for Bernie Sanders over Biden by almost 2 times the amount of voters. So our Democrats here don't like Biden and love Bernie by almost 200% more. That just means when Biden doesn't come through on healthcare, on immigration, on ending the wars, on being sucking up to the banks, there's going to be a lot of pissed off and upset people here in California. And we have a way of letting everyone know when we don't think you're doing the right thing. And I think they're going to call Biden out in about 3 months when it's clear that he is a centrist and a closet Republican and has no intention to do the progressive things that Californians want. You may not agree with that statement, but by California standards, that man's a Republican. And he would never run for office here. He would never have been allowed to run for office here. And he would never have won an office here. I've run that by everyone in California. Like, yeah, that's right. Even that's the people who like Biden. The guy would have gone nowhere here. And this is not Biden.
To coups in the U.S.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. I mean, the guy argued about fracking. The guy said we're not doing universal health care. He replaced Mary Nichols as the climate change liaison. He put an oil executive as his climate change network person. That don't fly around here. So we're just waiting for the honeymoon to be over. I think it's about 1 month to 3 months. And then people are going to go, wow, Joe Biden does not represent California at all. And he wants a very different America than we want. You're right. He ain't that white supremacist, but his vision of where things are going don't match where you are, California.
Yeah. So,
and that's the voters.
So the short version of what you're saying is, for all intents and purposes, true. If this was the UK, he'd be a member of the Conservative Party rather than, say, like the Brexit Party. And the AOC would be part of the, I don't know if she would be part of the Liberal Party anymore. She'd probably be part of the, oh God, what's the new party that just spurned off of the Liberal Party? Sorry, this isn't a conversation about what's happening in the UK.
But
so
you
folks,
get the idea.
Yeah.
You're going Democrat versus Democrat, and I'm going, they really ain't the same type.
Yeah.
There's
so
Cali Democrats and American Democrats.
So just I have to put this out as a disclaimer to everybody watching at home, because we're getting some chats here. This conversation is about secession. This conversation isn't about the virtue of the politic that is California. It's should they be able to secede or not, and is there a good case for secession generally? So no, I'm with you guys. I'm totally with you guys, but like, that's not the point of this conversation. Maybe Marcus and I can have a debate on specifics some other day, but that's not what this conversation is about. Because he and I, when it comes to politics, it seems like probably don't agree on a lot. And on that note, he and I have had we had a conversation over the phone. We kind of disagree with our take on the legal framework for secession. But again, we don't really. It's going to get into an esoteric world that's just going to put everybody to sleep. So. Marcus, what is I'm not going to disagree with you. I just want to get into your head. What do you envision as the framework for secession in California? Like, what's the how here? The how does California become its own state? And before you answer, let's start with the 30,000 foot view instead of, yeah.
There's 2 options. Number 1, there was the Civil War, but you may not have heard this. Civil War isn't actually law. It's just a war. If you're going to have laws, that means you got to write something down on paper. So the Constitution says for any legal questions, the Supreme Court decides in the Constitution. The Supreme Court, in fact, did visit the topic of secession after the Civil War in Texas versus White. And it said if you get consent, you can leave. You cannot unilaterally leave, but with consent, you can leave. Since that court case came from the Supreme Court, it's the only one. And after that war, that means that's the legal precedent for all decisions about secession. No, you can't ignore it. Yeah, you got to pay attention. Constitution says that. Consent could be defined as 51% of American states or Congress. Erwin Chemerinsky, that's Chemerinsky, he is the dean of the Berkeley Constitution Center and created 2 California law schools, said in GQ magazine, simple 51% vote of Congress could technically qualify for consent, since consent's never been defined. Some people say consent has to be 2/3, like the amendment process. But we here in Yes, California, we're happy to get David Savallo, another constitutional scholar here in California, to say that consent maybe means the amendment process, but he could not declare that it did. In fact, the Supreme Court would have to decide if consent means 51% or 2/3 like the amendment process. Either way, you can get the votes. I just got done talking about how a lot of red states don't like us, and they say so in opinion polls and every other way. So we think we can reach out to them and say, hey, vote us out. And we think they'll do it. And we think that they would easily do it if we could just let them know that, do you understand how emotional Californians are? If they saw 51 senators, 50 senators, under 50 House of Representatives people say, you know what, we are sick and tired of California, and just about half of America says, go ahead and get the hell out. Californians would be so shocked and so angry, they would say, oh yeah, well then we're leaving.
So when you say, oh yeah, we're leaving, do you mean that Gavin, you're going to convince Gavin Newsom or the legislative body in California to basically draft secession papers and hand them into Washington and say we're out?
So what we would say is, in California, we have the initiative law. And Yes, California has filed about, 12 initiatives. So we have gotten this question in law. Basically, in California, we have this process where if you get enough voter signatures, you can put it right up for a vote to the public. You can skip the California government. So everyone in Sacramento could say, horrible idea, doesn't matter. Still goes right to the voters. If the voters voted in, it's law. Newsom could be kicking and screaming. He'd have to do it.
I have to interrupt you because this is not common practice in other states. So what you're describing is a referendum process whereby you guys get enough signatures, you can petition for a referendum to be basically forced, and the legislative body and Newsom couldn't do anything about that. And then if it passes at referendum, it instantaneously becomes law. So if there was a referendum question that was as simple as, do you wish to secede from the United States? If the answer was yes, that is your secession paper that you've submitted to Washington. Do I have that read correctly?
Yeah, and we also point out that Brexit passed by international legal standards with the 52% vote. So we get 52% of the California voters, which is only a fraction of total Californians. We have international legal standards saying good enough. So if we can get half of America, which is already there, to say we hate you and leave, we think Californians would go, oh my God, we could actually do this. So we could actually get the votes.
So the way you went back. So all right. So the way you envision this isn't just an entirely unilateral process where, so there are more right-wing movements where they're basically just saying, call up Kristi Noem, get Kristi Noem to draft papers and say au revoir to Washington. That would be an entirely unilateral process. It sounds like the process you're describing is effectively, and excuse me while I reduce it to its smallest elements.
Reduce.
Yeah. It's reductionist, but forgive me. It sounds like what you're describing is basically a convention of the states. The states get together and say, we don't want California. And when I say the states don't say that, I mean, like, there'd be 49 remaining states. 25 of them say, we get out of here, California.
I'm not sure it has to be a convention of the states.
So you think it could be done through a legislative process?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely. And the key part here is that the phrase is consent to the states. That phrase has never been defined. Does that mean convention? Does that mean amendment? Does that mean simple majority? Until you have consent to the states defined, no one knows, and they're guessing. And guess who gets to define that? The Supreme Court. So until we get the Supreme Court to go back in there, open it up, and define that, it's guessing.
So, I mean, what do you think the response is going to be from Washington? And I asked this question because it's entirely plausible in my eyes, depending on how things time out, that you don't get the government that you have in Washington, and instead you get a government in Washington that, for all intents and purposes, says, "What? No, war declared. We're sending in troops."
How would you declare war when everything was done legally?
So you're saying, because again, we don't have a. You just said that we don't have a definition for what consent of the states means.
Sure.
Right.
Sure,
So
but
if the timing works out such that let's say the states say we don't want you, and then it takes you guys a while to get the ballot initiative put together, and then the government in Washington changes so that it's not, say, Democrats in both houses, and then let's say it's not Biden presidency, or let's say it is Biden in the presidency, and he let's say hates this initiative and says it gets unhinged and just orders the troops in.
So by law, he couldn't do that unless he had a second vote to undo the first one.
I agree.
Democracy. So
I agree.
when Congress says we're cool with that, that's it. So it's like, oh, I'm going to violate what the proper process said was okay and send in troops. You're the dictator now, and that's illegal. So we don't think it'll happen because.
Right. So you're offering a principled rationale for defending yourself in that circumstance with.
I'm just saying, if you go to Congress
means.
and half of them say go, you can't then the next day go, well, I just ignore half of Congress and I ignore the law and I don't care how decisions are made for the last 200 years. Okay. I got to do what I want. No one's going to do that.
So there's
and we're only talking about this way.
So are you aware of the other, because I'm not aware of any other left-leaning secessionist movements across the U.S., and I'm aware of quite the number of right-leaning secessionist movements. Are you familiar with, say, the Red State Secession or the Greater Idaho Movement?
I'm familiar with almost all of them, and I know about 60% of them personally.
Okay, so if let's start with the Greater Idaho Movement, because they're not as secessionist as we're going to form our own new country. That's something where we're basically just redrawing borders, and I'm going to give you their take. So, excuse me, while I give you their take. So, Idaho is, as you probably are aware, blood red. As a state, it's as red as it can come. And the eastern 2/3, let's say half, but it's really like 2/3 of Oregon, better aligns culturally and in terms of how they vote with Idaho. So instead of seceding, they find it would be an easier process to just simply redraw borders so that the states are aligned in a way that more reflects their cultural values. What are your thoughts on that, especially given that there is actually a huge swath of Republicans in, for example, the Valley in California?
So the Valley's liberal. A lot of people think it's conservative. It's about 55% liberal. Went that way in the last 10 years.
Yeah, but there's still an awful lot of red in those districts.
I understand. And they've lost the last 3 elections over the last 12 years. And every demographic profile by the Public Policy Institute here in California says the demographics are only going in one way. So you lost 3 times in the last 10 years. It ain't going backwards. So days are over. Time for you to move if you don't like it, or you can adjust. And the Valley's gone liberal. Orange County, Inland Empire, Sacramento, and the Upper Valley and the Coastal Territory. A lot of Republicans don't want to hear that. They want to hear, 10 years ago, and it's only 55%, but look at the trajectory. 3 elections in a row, lost, and every demographic profile says it's going away because there's people like me, minorities, who think Republicans are a little bit white supremacy and things they said, and we ain't ever going to forgive them. And the demographic profile says that goes one way. So really, when you're talking about conservative sections of California that may want to leave and not go with liberal California, you're really only talking about the Sierra Nevada mountains. So Kern County, maybe, that's the oil fields. And then the Sierra Nevada mountains right up against the butt of California, the other states, and then Jefferson in the far, far, far north. That's about it. 80% of the population and landmass, urban areas, it ain't like that, never going to be. That's the way the trends are going. Don't take my word. PPIC said that. So let's talk about Jefferson and some of those Republicans in the mountain areas. Yes, they are not like the rest of California. They have hardcore Idaho, Oregon, Nevada beliefs, and they frankly hate us. I've talked to Jefferson. I've done interviews with Mark Baird a couple times. It's clear that's how they feel. They think we're disgusting subhumans. Okay. Here's the thing. Every time they talked about splitting up California, about 68% says, hell no. I don't know how you're going to split up California when 2/3 of California would have to approve of it. And they've said every single time over the last 20 years, not interested. How are you going to do that legally?
Okay, so you're saying that there basically isn't the political will to do that in California, to have to
I'm
instead of
saying yeah, because the way that the process they're talking about would work, you would get congressional consent and the state consent. And what I find amusing is that every poll looking at this shows, no, you are not going to get Californians to back this at all. There's zero evidence of that over multiple surveys over the last 10 years. Nothing there. And they never bring this up. And I'm like, how are you going to convince 2/3 you're wrong and to switch their thing?
I mean,
when you say we love Trump and we hate you guys and your values, people remember that kind of talk.
I mean, it's kind of like Puerto Rico becoming a state. Like, they voted on this multiple times. They don't want to be a state. So, okay,
Exactly.
if Californians don't want to break up their state, they don't want to break up their state. The other thing I wanted to bring up to you is that there are some other secessionist movements from the right wing. Most of them are much more unilateral in their how. So if you had something like, and I'm going to say it, Kristi Noem in South Carolina, and I only say Kristi Noem in South Dakota, because she has brass as big as this desk I'm sitting in front of, and would ignore her own legislature if that's what it took. If she decided to go through a unilateral process, would you be in favor of DC just saying, you know what, go ahead, see ya, we're out of here? And I bring it up because if she goes, the right-leaning other states like Texas, if one state goes, kind of like in the Civil War, if one state from the right goes, I think you're going to see a number of states, watershed moment.
I'm for anybody leaving if they want to. I think the UN treaty, which every nation on earth, except for maybe a few, signed, says that you recognize the right of self-determination, which is the right that people should be able to choose the government they want to be with. In American law, treaties supersede all domestic law. So America literally signed a document saying we recognize the right of any people anywhere around the world to say, you have the right to choose the government you want to be with. I think that's inherently a safe and good principle and has helped build peace for almost a century. So if a state wanted to apply it, I think, yeah, we should let them because America signed that. And basically all peace over the last 70 years is based upon that principle. So yes, I would do that. Now, here's the caveat though. Largely, I would say yes, because I think we're getting to the point where if you don't start letting people have freedom and the ability to leave, they're going to start shooting at each other. I think we're basically there. It's way past talking, and it's let Junior get out and get his own home, or he's going to burn down the whole house with you sleeping in it.
Right, and I think it's because I think it's because of what you've mentioned that the California Democrats look like AOC, and AOC is fundamentally completely. There isn't, even at a very basic level, there isn't anything that the AOC wing of Democrats agree with. Say, I would say most conservatives within the Republican Party. Like, there's such a fundamental disagreement on really basic concepts that it's going to take either an incredibly long time to mend those ties and to bind those differences, or we're looking at just not playing the game. Like, okay, if you guys are going to be that completely different from us, and I'll say this from even your perspective, if we're going to be even that completely different from you guys, then what do we actually have that is actually binding us as a country? Well, if the answer is nothing, then why are we a country? So I think that would be the principal take on forming separate countries in that respect. And, I think I'm with you in terms of the better approach to going about this. However, again, if Kristi Noem drafted secession papers, I would be imploring my governor to order the National Guard here in Connecticut California's National Guard is similar to Connecticut's in that it's really, really separate from the federal government. I would be begging my governor to say, don't send in the troops. We don't need to do this. Let them go. If California wants to secede and it winds up being a unilateral process, then, I would hope that we would not send our troops in all of this. So I want to just press on one issue with you. How fractious would you be willing to get when it comes to this devolution here? So, for example, California secedes, and then you get fractions within California that are, let's say, somehow more radical than others. right? And let's say you have San Francisco and San Diego suddenly get to a point where they say, no, we're not doing this. We disagree with each other. And you end up getting, say, let's say, county level governments. How fractious would you be willing to get? Where is the line to be drawn where secession is no longer appropriate?
So I'm a huge fan of Willie Brown. Willie Brown is an old school politician. He can't run for office anymore, but he basically ran California for a long time. Started Kamala Harris, started Newsom's career, mega famous. And also, by the way, he went on TV in 2017 and said, let's go ahead and secede. So major political person that has my heart. He brought up that there were economic regions in California. And there's been a lot of understanding that there are different regional identities in California, and maybe we should recognize that. We here at Yes California have said that we are actively interested in the idea of promoting states within the nation of California. So we recognize that the Inland Empire doesn't get as much attention as it deserves, or Jefferson. These are kind of distant areas that are very rural, and they're not getting enough attention. And we recognize that as a legitimate issue. So what we said was, if we secede, maybe we should have a couple states, like 5, based upon the regions, based upon Willie Brown's thinking. And that would allow these 5 governors to have a direct input line to the now president, raising the profile of the Inland Empire and other rural conservative areas to be able to be listened to and paid attention to. We're very willing to that. And we find that most Californians, when we talk, are open to that. Not splitting, but allowing a division of administrative units and a higher profile of communication with the governor. There's definitely interest here.
Okay, so basically federalism within California.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. So the last question I'll ask you before we go into Q&A and before I give you an opportunity to tell people where to follow you again. The last question I have to ask you is, there are Republicans in California. I'm sure you've talked to them.
I'm related to them.
As this process goes through, what do you tell these people that say they want to flee? Let's say the California initiative, let's say 25 states say, we don't want California, right? And then you get the ballot initiative. The ballot initiative passes. Do you imagine that there would be a window offered, like a 6-month window offered, so that Republicans who don't want to live in what they envision California to likely become, to get out, while there are still basically open borders between California, Nevada, Arizona, and Oregon?
There was one study commissioned by, I believe it was a Canadian university, on legal secession. And they looked at the examples of going back to the Soviet Union. And what they found over the last 40 years of legal secession movements, not get your guns secession movements, is that once you get a tipping point where it's apparent that a majority of the population wants this, it takes about 2 years. That's what that study found.
2 years. What do you mean by it takes 2 years?
2 years before you're fully seceded. So the moment everybody goes, oh my God, they actually want to secede, and it's done legally, it's about 2 years before you're finally full on seceded. And the reason is that in legal secession movements, they're typically democracies doing it, and there's the vote. That means those are politicians who got into office. As you saw with Brexit, they want to secede. I better wrap this up and get it done before I run for re-election. So they were saying over the last 40 years, looking at examples around the planet, typically it's about 2 years. So yes, there would be a window time. I don't think it'd be very often. I also don't think many people are going to leave. I know a lot of conservatives. I'm born and raised in a Republican family, pro-military. I know people who voted for Trump. Somehow they don't think he's a whatever, but they voted for him anyways. The attitude is largely, I don't like it, but I'm not going to go anywhere. I mean, I'll complain, but my family lives here, my wife, my spouse, my favorite golf club. I already know what this place was. And if I had the wherewithal to leave and I hated it, I already would have been gone. Most of the people leaving California are doing it because they're destitute. They don't actually have a whole lot of cash. They're barely holding on. Now, a lot of people talk about the exodus of Californians. We're talking about the 7-Eleven manager. And the other thing is that the exodus of people leaving California now is lower than it was 20 years ago. We had a much bigger amount of people leave California in the 2000s. No one brings that up. Guess what? They said we were going to collapse in the 2000s. We're still here. Still
Well,
had new people coming in.
well, the big news from 2020, 2021 that I think everyone is going to miss is that on April 1st, we will get the results from the 2020 census, which I think will be the biggest news that is going to get completely overlooked. I actually talked about this on my stream a few weeks ago during the election, that I actually disagree with you on this regard, but we don't need to go have a real back and
No,
forth.
please.
I actually think that California, once the census results are revealed, is actually going to lose seats in the House. So obviously, if it remains a state, it's going to lose seats in the House. I think there are a number of blue states and swing states that are going to lose seats in the House. There are some recently blue states like, well, Arizona and Nevada that are probably going to be gaining seats. And I think on net balance, the the seats in the House are going to become quote unquote redder as a whole. So the census to me is going to be the biggest news of the year. And I don't think too many people are going to follow it because redistricting is a big deal. I live in Connecticut. We're definitely going to lose the 5th district. I followed the population trends here in Connecticut. If you watch United Van Lines, if you watched the Census Bureau's estimates here in Connecticut, people are running out of Connecticut. So unless we're having a conversation about the New Yorkers that have fled New York to come to Connecticut in the last 9 months as a response to COVID, and maybe that might have an effect on, maybe that would have a mitigating effect against the flight out of Connecticut. But I think that's going to be a really important consideration moving forward in that regard. But again, the conversation today is about secession, and we are about to allow you guys to chime in and ask your questions of Marcus. And if you guys got questions for me too, sure. So Marcus, before we get into Q&A, like I mentioned at the beginning of the show, just remind people how they can reach you.
Look at that. YesCalifornia.org, YesCalifornia.org, or you can type in Yes California CalExit. Find us on Facebook and Twitter. Love to talk with you. I do want to read a quote real quick if I could.
Go ahead.
This is from Danny Savalos. Here's the quote. The reality is that if California really wanted to, it could probably just leave America. It would be an unconstitutional thing and illegal, but what could Washington actually do about it? Post another announcement on the White House webpage saying it doesn't approve? No president would send in military. Danny Savalas said that in 2016, and he is the legal analyst for NBC News and MSNBC.
Great. So just a quick comment here from Dan Rice. Exactly just like I tell y'all, Texas Democrats are different than AOC Democrats. That's probably correct. Jody Carroll, I don't know if this is really a question specific to our topic here, Marcus, but maybe you want to touch up on it as it relates to the topic here today. Can't California do single-payer health care right now on their own? Why do they need the federal government? Shoot.
We can't afford it on our own, but if we were independent, F.H. Buckley and our own Yes California analysis has suggested we'd be saving on order about $163 billion. Thank you. I'm mentioned in that book by name, by the way.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Buckley. No, he mentions Yes California. He mentions us. He mentions me by name. So very much they're aware. He said that California would reduce our military budget to something equivalent to the amount that we spend Canada has in Israel. Not pushover. We would save $100 billion on that alone. That's just the military. When you look at that, we're not being a donor state and we're not having our trade deals held up. We're looking at an additional $60 to $80 billion in savings. Having universal health care here in California would cost about $100 billion. So right now, we're either going to raise taxes by $100 billion, which is close to 60 to 70% of all sales tax income. Income tax revenue. So you'd have to raise income tax here in California by about 60 to 70% to fund this.
Do you think Californians would go for that?
No, they're not.
Okay.
Or you secede, and then you automatically have 2 times the amount of money you need in a day like that.
Yeah, the right-wing response to that would be, well, you want to look at the other side of the ledger? But anyway, that's not really the point of. That's not really the point.
Donor state, and they live off our money. That's been a fact according to the IRS since '79.
Yeah, so we actually have like 50 or 60 comments in here, Marcus. You'll have to forgive me.
Let's do it.
Only like 3 of them actually have question marks at the end.
Let's if you want, throw me off the comments. If they seem like questions to you, I'll answer.
And a lot of this is in agreement with you, Marcus. So I mean, not much. Texas nationalist movement agrees with Marcus. Anyone has the right to leave. Self determination. I mean, I think he spoke about that.
We love the Texas nationalist movement. We worked with them in 2016, 2017. We have very different ideas of a good society, but they have been as committed to legal secession as we are. And yes, California is happy to be a partner to whatever degree the Texas nationalist movement would allow.
Federal government cronies. It's why other states want out too. That's from Jody. I think you actually agree with that.
I do. And I'm not saying corruption's gonna doesn't exist in California. What I'm saying is when I go to Californians and I go, how many of you been to Sacramento? Everybody raises their hand. And I go, how many of you been to Sacramento more than 5 times? Everybody raises their hand. When I go, how many of you been to DC? There ain't no hands. It's really hard to hold your politicians to account. You don't ever get to see them in the face.
Yeah.
That's all we're saying.
Yep. And that's actually why I've actually said this, and this is going to be utter blasphemy to the people in the chat. Go ahead and chew me out for this, but the more localized you get, the more access you have to your politicians, which means that the less significance the letter next to their name has. And I'll give you for instance, I will actually use a name because I like her, and I'm going to be talking about her in a positive light. Lisa Hida is a Democrat and a true blue Democrat. Had coffee with her multiple times. She is a real Democrat. I would say one of these, I call them basic bitch Democrats, kind of like basic bitch Republicans. Like, they're not AOC Democrats. They're more like moderate Democrats, if we will. People who say, well, we like the way things are. Maybe we could spend money in different places, right? Not the completely nuke the system and start completely over with something completely different. And I would never vote for Lisa if she was running for Connecticut's 5th congressional district. But I did vote for Lisa when she ran for town council, and when she was on New Milford's town council, she was my this is going to get me in trouble. All right, she was my favorite councilman, and she was a Democrat. So yes, Marcus, you bring up a point that is real. The more localized you get, the more access you have to these people, the easier it is to hold their feet to the fire. That means that the more important the localized governments get, and the more important devolution becomes. And you're right. I'm in Connecticut. Almost everybody has been to DC, but it's usually on like a sightseeing trip, and it happens like once in their entire life. Whereas Connecticut's a small state in area and in population. Everybody's been to Hartford, and I know my state senator and I know my state rep on a first name basis. I have both of their phone numbers in my phone right now, and it's really easy to reach out to them. Because of that, you can affect change in a much more useful manner, in a much more easy manner. So I've always, excuse me while I go a bit on my diatribe here, but I've always said that it is way more important for people to pay attention to their local politics than it is to what's happening in D.C.
I want to be clear on that. I'm not saying Democrats are perfect and they don't ever do anything wrong and there's no corruption. I'm just saying we're going to be doing better at fighting corruption. You know, if we reduce the scale to 1/10 the size, California is 1/10 the size of America. If all your decisions are 1/10 the amount of people in that room, they get done quicker. I do want to point out one thing. I don't think that California seceding will result in the dissolution of American states and everybody breaking off. I think it's a sexy idea and people want to do it. But I would ask everybody to look at what's called the real GDP map of American states. Most American states would be operating as good as Bolivia or Uruguay the moment they broke off. It costs a lot of money to run a nation. And if you look at the actual GDP on their own where they'd have to run it, 30, 40 states in America would be a failed nation within about a year if they tried to pull it off on their own. Just saying, don't take my word for it.
So actually, that's a question I can't believe I didn't put in my notes. What if other states, if California started going down this pathway and it looked like it was inevitable, and it hadn't completed yet, but it looked like it was inevitable? If other states wanted to join you, what are your thoughts on that? And I'll give the only state I can think of off the top of my head that shares a border with California that would probably be on board would be Nevada, and that's only because of Las Vegas. But how would you feel about other states joining the CalExit movement and forming another state with you? Or is it that California is just so different from everybody else, California and California only?
Um, so when Newsom said that he was going to start a pact of Western states and do our own coronavirus reopening protocol, there was a big discussion on that. I would say it's a mixed bag. There are certainly some Californians who see Washington and Oregon, or at least the liberal parts of them, as fellow coastal liberals and think, hey, we're already here on the coast. We can make this work. We're kind of blocked off from the rest of America from the Rockies. But, our movement never really got traction on that. I'd say about a third of the people in the movement are interested in that. So it's definitely there. Two-thirds, though, go, I've never been to Oregon. I don't know what Seattle is. You're telling me they're liberals. I've never been there. I don't know those people. I know California. How am I sure they're just like me? I've never even been there. And you want to add Republican states to us? We're trying to get the hell out of that. Why would we want to go back in and get Arizona, Nevada, and Wyoming and all these other? We're trying to leave that. But there are some people saying, hey, if California seceded, take as many states as you can, get as big as possible. It makes it easier to survive, and financially, we could survive financially on our own. Their argument then is it's just an even better profile. So there's some talk. I would say that the majority of people, although it could shift, think we don't really need anybody else. We could do it all California by itself on our own.
Yeah, so the last comment I'm going to read here before we kind of start wrapping things up. Texas is doing it unilateral. We do not need D.C. permission. Texas votes, Texas leaves. Well, if that winds up being the case, I think Marcus and I kind of agree. We really hope that D.C. doesn't send in the troops. And, more power to you if that's how you decide to go. The states have their sovereignty for a reason. And, I wish there was on the books a more explicit unilateral pathway to secession. I would be perfectly in favor, as I mentioned throughout the beginning of the show. If there was a convention of states and the topic of creating a unilateral pathway to secession, I would be in favor of having that unilateral pathway created. Marcus, how do you feel about if a convention of states were called and there was a unilateral pathway?
Convention of the states is, it is something the California government said they supported, but I got to tell you, I'm real cautious about that. You open those things up, it's not real clear that people can't rewrite whatever they want. So this idea that you're going to have convention of states that is on a topic, I haven't seen.
It won't be. It won't be. That's
what I'm saying. I don't know if you do that. It's Pandora's box. Now it's open, and they're like,
right. But if
women can't vote anymore, and it's like, oh my god.
Well, I don't think that's going to happen. But if one of the topics was the creation of a unilateral pathway to secession, would you be in favor of that? The creation of that pathway?
I would have to see. On the surface, yes. It would have to depend upon who's backing this convention. Do we think they're just about that one issue, or is it actually a plot to get us to take away women's rights to choose? If it was some sort of secret plot or game, there's no way in hell I could back that. If, however, it appeared they were honestly looking at that one and only one issue, and that it was secure to do that, yes, I would definitely support it. If it's a trick to do something else, no.
So I don't. So I'm not asking if you would be in favor of the convention of states. I'm asking if you'd be in favor of the creation of a legal unilateral pathway. So, geez, I'm struggling with this.
On surface, yes.
Okay.
I reserve the right to say, oh my God, is that what they're doing? I don't think that's what they're actually trying to do. They're trying to make it look like they're doing, and they're trying to set something up to take away rights. That's not something California is going to back up. If it looks like an honest pathway with a single vote, and that's everyone's talking about, yes.
All right. Well, Marcus, I don't really have anything else here in our chat here to really bring up. The last message I had, it's Jody says, great discussion. Love you, Marcus, and praying for success. I think that's a great way to wrap. I think that's a great way to wrap up this show. Marcus, thanks for coming on. Everybody who's been in the chat, everybody who's been watching, thanks for staying with me. Elliot, if you happen to be in the chat, let's talk sometime, because I think it's time to revisit that the secession debate that we had, where I think I'm changing my mind on that position. So everybody, again, thanks everybody for joining us. Marcus, thanks you especially. And we'll see you guys in the next one. Good night, folks.